In the next three problems, we're going to solve logarithmic equations. They're going to start the equation with logs. So the first thing we're going to do is we always want to get the log expression by itself. So to do that, we need to get rid of this 5, and we're going to subtract 5 because this 5 here is being added. So we need to remove it. We need to subtract 5. Now that we have the log expression by itself, we're going to write it in its other form. We're going to write it using exponential notation here. So we're going to have 4 to the second power equals x. So 4 to the second equals x. And now to solve for x, all we have to do is figure out what 4 to the second power is, which is 16. So now when you're working with logs, you have to look for extraneous solutions. So before we can call that our answer, we need to check that if we took this x out and we plugged in 16, would it make it negative? And in this case it doesn't. So we know it's not extraneous. Now if we want to check this, we can enter this into our calculator. Without a calculator here, we would ask ourselves 4 to what power is 16, which that's 2. And then 5 plus 2 is 7. So we get 7 on both sides. So we know that it checks out. So the answer is 16. Okay, this problem, the logarithmic expression is all by itself. So since it's all by itself, we can write it in its exponential form. So 4 to the second power equals and now we have an equation that has an exponent of a 2. So since this is a quadratic equation, we need to use methods that we learned in the last chapter. So to solve this, we can use completing the square, we can use quadratic formula, we can use factoring. Try one of those methods from last chapter. So first thing, before I even do that, I'm going to simplify. 4 to the second power is 16. And my first method I'm going to use is I'm going to try to see if it could be factored. And we know at this point in this class to factor, it has to equal 0. So now that my equation is set equal to 0, I'm going to see what multiplies to negative 16 but adds to negative 6. So I know that x minus 8 and x plus 2 would be its factored form because negative 8 times 2 is negative 16, and negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6. So now we're going to set each of these equal to 0. So x minus 8 equals 0 and solve this. So we would get x equals 8 there. And then here we would solve this one, x plus 2 equal to 0. Subtract 2 to both sides, and we would get negative 2. So we have to check and see if both of these answers work. So if we think about it, so we got x equals 8. So if I put 8 in here and square it, you'd get 64. And then here we'd have 6 times 8, which is 48. And when we subtract these here, we are not going to get a negative. So we know that it's not extraneous. So x equals 8. So far, so good. Now, if we wanted to continue to check here, we would see that 4 to the second power is 16. So we get the same thing on both sides. Now we need to check if our other solution, which was negative 2 here, negative 2 is a solution. So if we plug in negative 2 for x and square it, we'd have 4. And then we'd have negative 6 times negative 2, which is positive 12. And we get 16. So no problem, we do not get a negative here, so that's good. And again, 4 to the second power is 16, so we get the same thing on both sides. So this particular equation has two solutions, and they both work. Alright, last one here. So we want to get the log by itself, but as you can see, there's two of them. So we have to write them as one log. So we know since this is subtraction, we would use division to write it as a single log. And now that the log is by itself, we're going to take it and write it as an exponential equation. So since there's no base there, it's a 10. So we'd have 10 to the second power equals x plus 6 over 3. And 10 to the second power is 100. And to get rid of this 3, since we have a rational equation, a fraction in our equation, we're going to multiply both sides by the common denominator, which is 3, so those will cancel. 3 times 100 is 300. And now to get x by itself, we'll subtract 6. So we'll get that x equals 294. So we need to think about, if we put 294 in for x, will this ever be negative? So it will not, because when we add 6 to that, we will get 300. And then we would put in our calculator log 300 minus log 3 and see if it equals 2. And we should get 2.